Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today for Lesson 10 Q&A. It's our final meeting, and we're going to today really dial into the concept plan design and take a look at any questions you have a little bit later. But without further ado, let's take a look at the assignment, and then I've got plenty of examples to show you. Yeah, and then lots of time for questions, we're hoping. So I'll try and minimize my talking here. All right, so let's just shrink the screen a little bit here. There we go. Okay, so lesson number 10, the final part of the course, and great to see you all here and hoping everybody will be able to pull this off. No doubt it's the hardest part when we get down to that concept plan. As you can see with the points that are awarded, we have the local network survey, which is 4, and concept is 18. So I'm actually not going to spend any time today on the local network survey. I think it's pretty straightforward. If there is any questions, happy to answer them. But I really want to spend the time I have left with all of you looking at this concept design and again, showing you some examples and seeing if you have any questions about that. And I see there's some really good questions in the Q&A document that I want to allocate time for. So yeah, concept plan. So this is the culmination of all of our work through the course. And if we take a look, if I kind of reflect on what my wife Angela and myself do with our work, the concept is definitely the well, we'll say the gathering of all the layers of designs that we do. So we do our design work a little bit different, and in terms of its approach, and we're going to show you a few examples of that. But today we want to really focus on what this course is asking of you. And so let's take a look at some of the things that we want you to include in your concept plan. So first of all, we want your existing plan, which, is your base plan. It's showing the project site in its current state. And again, this is a good place to put it. We want to be able to reflect on what is currently there as well as what you're proposing. And that's our next line here. Just get my spotlight tool. There we go. So this is the final map, and we want to see what you have proposed for your project site. All structures and explanation. We want to have things labeled clearly, and you want to distinguish your proposed plant material from your existing. And that's pretty easy to do. Often people will show you what others do, but often just having your existing plants grayed out is a wonderful way to do it. And for this class and for ourselves, when we put designs together, the water layer, or what we're calling here the water map, has a huge influence on this. And whether it's a small urban site or larger acreage, water is the driving force in the landscape. And you could say for better or worse. For some, it's stormwater management, managing high flows, but they are assets, and we want to make sure we're optimizing those. So that is a big part of the whole when we're looking at this concept plan. We want to see a mission statement, what it's all about in a big picture aspect, some of the goals. And really, some of these goals would be extrapolated from the client survey that you did early in the course. We want to see proposed zones and pathways. So how do those differ? They may or may not differ from the from your existing. zones, but odds are they will. And then the water management plan. And for us, that's a huge part of every drawing. It really does drive what you do, and certainly um, it lays the foundation. Um, and then we're looking at soil fertility and how that's going to all get phased in and the budget. So it's really interesting when we get to a plan that's completed, how that is going to get phased in and what are realistic budgets. And that's probably one of the hardest parts of the process, is trying to sort out what is realistic. And, Angela and myself, learned the hard way early in our career, where we would do these beautiful designs and, have an idea of what it would cost, but it was very, very difficult process. So that, unfortunately, you get better at that with time if you're paying attention to your installations, just tracking how long it takes to do certain tasks, and um, the whole estimating part of this process is a course unto its own. But we can briefly touch on that today if we have time and there is some interest in it. Um, and then we're looking at sort of the different principles, permaculture principles that are used, and how that sort of interconnects with social permaculture. Does it help socially and culturally in your area? And then the SWOT analysis. What is your takeaway from that? So again, some of the elements we want to make sure that you do include is your base plan or the existing site conditions, the concept. So that concept, again, it's a big picture. It's not a detailed design. So, and I'm going to show you a little bit later the difference, and that might help you in terms of not getting a bit overwhelmed. Because if you're having to apply, you know, construction details and stuff at this point, that could be a little bit much, or you could feel that way. And certainly if you feel like putting in as much detail as you want, please do, but don't feel that you have to. So again, the mission statement and goal, those are important elements that we're taking from that client survey. So this one thing I learned during my career is that any design and installs that we do, they're not my landscapes. Early on in my life, I did feel, if I reflect on it, I did feel quite a bit of ownership with certain projects, but the reality is it's not ours. So we want to make sure that we're doing what the client wants in terms of that end goal, and that's that mission statement and goal list. Proposed zones, water management, fertility, the phasing, these are all repeated from above, but do make sure that those are included in your concept plan. So there's a little bit more detail here. There's a resource page. So a little bit of vision statements, ways to craft that if you're not sure. Some examples here. So these are great if you get a little bit stuck with that. And again, really, these should be coming out of your, in some way, they should be extrapolated from the client survey. So you're not having to make something up or create something that's out of thin air, so to speak. Again, we have the rubric. That's always a good thing to reference. And this sort of breaks out everything we're looking for. And the network survey, of course, is important, but we're not really going to focus on that because I think it's pretty straightforward what's required with that. So let us take a look at a few examples here. I am going to try and clean up my screen here so that I'm not okay. You can't see this, but I have a few boxes in my way here. Let's see what we can do. Okay. So here is a student we had in the spring, and we're not going to look at her design, but we're going to just go to the very end and look at what she did in terms of her concept. So this is a small urban site, and if I recall, this is actually a duplex, so that not only is it a small lot, but the client here is only really concerned with half of this. So you can clearly see the existing plan, and there's a fence and a project boundary here, a nice legend, and it was done by hand, which is always lovely. Always envious of people that can do this, because I certainly don't feel I have those skills, or haven't cultivated them, because I use CAD system. And again, this is our existing plan. So that's a good first start. And then we have the proposed concept and all of the things that this client is hoping to do. And, personally, I would not recommend with your call outs doing them in different colors, but, I understand person wanting to do that. I think it's easier to read when they're black and white, but or black text. The only thing with this that I would point out is try and avoid having lines or arrows that cross another one, and sometimes that can be quite difficult. But it can get a little bit confusing or messy. Well, we'll say that just from an aesthetic point of view. When that happens. And then this is the actual concept plan with the goals. That's great. Statement of purpose. And they've included the zones here, pathways, etc. So this is where a great example where how effective it can be to have a black and white or grayed base plan and overlaying it with your new ideas or what you're trying to show. If we go back to this, if we were trying to do the same with the full color version, it's not quite as impactful. And the I guess the one objective I would say with a good design would be, can somebody else pick this up and fully understand it, or do you need to be there explaining it? So obviously presenting it and as a designer is great, and you always want to do that, but the less that you need to do that, the better in terms of how you've performed graphically here. So again, that's the concept page. And then the water management. When I do this, I call it the water layer, because it's, and that's the first thing that we look at is assets on the site and what we can do with them. This is a great description. We have downspouts located, water flow lines, some rain barrels. And this is quite nice where we have a description, an image, and then an indication where that item is. Now you can see, again, we've got lines going through lines, so it's a little bit tricky. No big deal, but just for future, it's just something to keep in the back of your mind as one of those things we want to try and avoid. So this is a nice job here. They're really packing in, this lady has packed in a lot of elements into a small site. So they got rain barrels, drip irrigation, and some swales. Now I will say, and I point this out, this path that a lot of people take with rainwater storage. They'll either have it in a barrel or a cistern and feel they can uh, energize a drip irrigation system with it. And it's not generally doable. You have to have a little pump to do that. So, and why is that? Well, most drip irrigation, like is shown here, these have pressure compensating emitters, and they need a certain amount of pressure to operate. Now, why do they have these emitters? Well, it just makes sure it ensures that there's the same amount of water being distributed throughout the whole system, as opposed to uh, like a soaker hose. When you turn a soaker hose on, it's really full out at the beginning, and then as you get towards the end of the hose, there's less and less and less. And that is the main reason. We don't want to over irrigate one area and under irrigate another. So using pressure compensated, and that's, this is all standard with drip irrigation now, but to run this correctly, you have to have about 20 psi of pressure, and that just wouldn't occur with rain barrels, because even if the rain barrels were on top of the house, because you need to get 20 psi, you'd need about 50 feet of elevation at least between the bottom of the cistern and where you're delivering the water. So it's often something that we can't, gravity fed irrigation is often for, um, you know, for acreage or farm settings rather than urban. So a wonderful idea. Now, what you could do here is you could actually have a small solar pump. That's something that could definitely happen. Um, there's a lot of really good pump systems too. So if you're in an urban setting and you don't want to have a huge investment, there are some really good options there you could look at. So enough about water. If we go on to the next sheet here, we're looking at soil fertility. And again, it's really nice to have this sort of grayed out image and then some highlights of where this person is going to be focusing their attention on soil fertility. So they want to chop and drop. They want to do some mulching and cover cropping, composting, and duck bedding and tub water. So that's if you have ducks, you got to have water, and then of course that water is going to have some nutrient in it, and certainly good to reuse in your landscape. So this is very well laid out, and a little bit of an explanation with each point here. And again, trying to do a lot of little things in the landscape. And, my observation is during what I've seen, having a lot of a broad approach to a strategy is going to be far more effective than the silver bullet. So we have seen that with prospective clients that want rainwater systems, and they think, oh, that's it. My water challenges are all taken care of. And there's no doubt collecting water off your roof and storing it is an excellent first step. But what if you have compacted soils? What's going to happen when you go to apply it? It's not going to infiltrate fully. So there's all of these aspects to consider. And that, again, with soil fertility, you want to try and look at this in a broad sense rather than very singular. And then there's the plant system. So here, this is a great way of showing existing plants. They've been grayed out, and the proposed plants are colored. And we also have a legend for both. So we have a legend for existing, and then we have a legend for proposed. So that's a nice way to set it out. And with this kind of a plant symbol where it's really a circle with some identification in it, that's pretty much the only way you can do it is using legends, and it does help a little bit. I'll show you what we do. It's slightly different, but then our software allows for that. So that's part of it. What you're using will kind of not inhibit, but will dictate how you graphically present this. So again, we have these ideas, and this kind of second half of the whole process is how we articulate them graphically. And I know for myself, this refinement of graphics is, it's been through my whole career. And we've been actively designing here for about 26 years. And then prior to that, it was 10 years of, parks work. And so, uh, yeah, it's an ongoing thing. I'm always looking at ways to improve what we do, especially with a CAD system that can look a little bit sterile at times. Let's see here. So different elements that's being pointed out here. So yeah, you get a good idea of what I'm trying to achieve with these new plantings. And again, nice to see tree, shrub, and herbaceous items, some vines here, some herbs, all kinds of different plants that are intended for this landscape. So it's a nice example. And then we get into the tricky part, the phasing and the budget. And that is tricky. Um, this took me years to actually figure out. Way back when we started with our business, we conducted our business in what's called a cost plus uh, approach. So it was very fair. We would just charge our clients for our time and the materials we used, plus an agreed upon markup on the material. And it worked well, um, particularly when you're learning about all of these things. The complications came in when you would be on a large project and there was a lot of changes that would occur, and those changes would be hard to track and hard to articulate. And we did our best with that, no doubt about it. But yeah, it was tricky. So we could see we couldn't keep going with that approach. And fortunately, um, for ourselves, in some ways, our original company didn't it. We shut it down. It basically collapsed during an economic um, downturn, and we had a huge overhead because we had equipment and staff, and it was a hard period to go through. But I then went and worked for a landscape company in town here, one of the larger ones on Vancouver Island, and I was a project manager and a commercial estimator. So I spent 2.5 years with them, and that's where I learned how to refine my estimating process. So, I could comfortably price projects. I think the largest one was $500,000 that I did for them, and it was invaluable. Cutthroat business, really. Um, but it was a great learning experience. And then I decided I wanted to leave that and start again with Angela, and we did so with a completely different approach, with low overhead and quality of life being a big part of it, because our old company really just took over our lives, took over my life. And yeah, so long story short, that's 26 years later, we're very comfortable doing fixed price projects. And that way our overhead gets covered. We earn the profit that we're hoping to earn. Um, but it really comes down to the same thing. We're guessing how long it's going to take us to do certain parts of a project. And I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it, for those who want to do this professionally, this is a big part of um, enjoying what you do, and phasing in a project can be really tricky. And I know there's a question about that. I think Melissa has, and we're going to dive into that a bit deeper as soon as we get to the end of this example here. So that's just a little snapshot of where I'm coming from, and I'm very grateful that that roller coaster happened, because today, I'm really enjoying what I do, and I can comfortably go forward. We're very busy in our business, and can we basically kind of pick and choose the projects we want to get involved with, and as opposed to when you're starting out and you're trying to just get anything. But yeah, this is tricky. Do your best. This isn't really for you're not held accountable for it, but it is a really good exercise to go through, because ultimately, if you're a contractor, you're designing something and then you're putting it in the ground, you're going to need to know this. This is not the sort of system that we use, but it is an important exercise to go through, even if your clients are doing the installation themselves. You want to have a good idea of, what are the materials going to cost them. So again, this is really tricky, and it almost deserves a course on its own. So the last part here, we're going into permaculture principles and a little bit about social permaculture and the SWOT analysis. And then this person had a few questions and comments. So that is one of the student examples, and I had a bunch of others pulled up here, but I don't think there's any value given our time constraints. Let's see, we got a question here from Ben. So Ben had a good question here on the chat. What changes did you make to your business model? Yeah, well, that is a very good question. A couple of things, Ben. One, we didn't have employees anymore. And what we did is I was very lucky to have people approach us and say, well, I want to work with you. And they were already self-employed. So there's a couple in particular that still work with us 5, 6 years. Gosh, been more than that, actually. So they're willing to work us into their schedule, and they'll come in and help us out on certain projects if they sound interested, if it's interesting to them. And we don't take on, like prior, we had to be in the field every day. While designs were going on in the office, I was in the field making them happen. And it was a bit brutal that way. So now we have been just doing a couple of projects a year, and I've doing some work for OSU and doing some design work, and I do some rainwater design. I've got my hands in a few different revenue streams, so I don't rely on one. So the biggie was employees and no equipment. I don't have an excavator or skid steer or trailers or trucks that need to tow those. We have a 20-year-old pickup truck that we own, doesn't owe us anything if it breaks tomorrow. And so that was lowering our overhead. Now, the other piece of the puzzle that I can't get into very deeply today is capturing your overhead within your projects. So It's called an overhead recovery system, and that's the model of estimating that I use. So we have, it's quite a process. You have to figure out your annual overhead, and it gets built into your project prior to applying profit. So if we wanted to make, 10% profit on a project, um, we would indeed be doing that because our overhead, which would be, office supplies and fuel and all of these things are all integrated into the pricing of our labor and materials. So it's a long question to answer there, Ben, but that's kind of basically what we did. We just shed all of our, and I see it happening now with a lot of people, brand new trucks and excavators. And honestly, I feel we're running into a tough economic period. And I have a feeling I know where those types of businesses are headed. They're going to be, suffering a little bit. So hopefully that answers your question, Ben. Uh,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, no problem. It's OSU could do a course just on that, on the business side of this. And I know Javan Bernakovich, another instructor, and myself have talked about doing this sort of mentorship after the PDC Pro course, but we haven't quite got there yet. It might happen one day, but both very busy at the moment. So, but it's certainly something that could help people out. I mean, I didn't have mentors beyond my parks experience, and yeah, I went to the University of Life. It sure would have been a lot easier and less painful to have somebody help guide the way. But ultimately you have to go through these experiences and take responsibility for whatever choices you've made. Okay, why don't I'm going to stop sharing that document. And what I think I'll do is just show you maybe one or two examples of our concept plans and some details that we have done. I've got a lot of them I could show, but we don't have time, so we will just focus on a couple here. So let me get my thumbnail so I know. Oh, that's not the right one. Okay. Okay. That will do. So here is a concept plan, basically. And this is one that we did a couple years ago, and we did the installation, about 90% of the installation anyhow. Last summer that got interrupted. My father was really ill and he ended up passing at home here, and my wife's father passed, they both passed within a month. So we kind of had to shift gears and reprioritize ourselves. But we did most of the install on this project, and I don't have a base plan to show you. That's typically not part of our package. But you can see here we have various revisions. So what we do is an initial concept for people like you are doing right now. You're going to do this initial concept. And what we do is we then present that and then get feedback and refine it based on their feedback. And we build in a couple of edits. So, and we do this for a fixed price. We figure out how long it's going to take us, and we're, pretty darn accurate with our design and our installs. So we can comfortably do that. And then we come up with this final concept. And then what happens on a situation like this, where we have this on an acreage site, we're just seeing part of the project site here. And you can see this road kind of weaves in and off the property line. It's a strata road shared by several other people. But that's part of the base plan, and what the concept ended up being, and we can get, I don't know how many sheets I have to show you here, but we generally start with water. And the water here was rainwater catchment off of this shop. There's a shop here. It was going to go into this little pump chamber and feed these cisterns, and then these were going to feed the landscape because this is in an area where water is scarce. The people really wanted a lush landscape. So I don't have to really talk too much about the concept itself, but we're showing new plantings, a little patio, and this vegetated parking area so the water can infiltrate there. After the concept phase, we then did the planting plan, which is shown here, where we identify each and individual plant. And we have to do this in order to price a project, because otherwise we have no idea of the material costs, right? And this takes a little bit of getting used to. It took me quite a few years. I used to, in my early years, I would gather a bunch of plant material, go to the site and lay it out, and it'd be very free form. And I'd have a little bit of an idea where I wanted to go with it, but it all happened on the site. Whereas here, we do it all on paper first, and then we know our material costs. We get them to the site, and then I do adjust it. It's not any time. It's never as is, as per drawing, but it's close. So again, what we do, our software allows us to create these individual symbols, and they're basically smart objects. So they'll contain data, and they'll have the plant name, the size, some comments here. You can see that it generates, or we can generate a plant list, and that's what we'll use to send to a nursery for pricing. We'll just send them the plant list, say, here you go, and they'll price it for us. Oh, let's see, Melissa. Yes, Melissa's had a good question here. Are these plants shown at full maturity? I would say they're shown at sort of a 10-year. Yeah. So maturity is really, that's a tough one to define. What we make sure when we are doing our layouts is that all the woody plants have space and will never need to be pruned unless there's a need for it because of damage, or perhaps that particular plant needs to be cut back for some reason. So we make sure that there's lots of space with the woodies, which are these larger symbols, and then the perennials are all kind of infill. They're the icing on the cake, but they can be shifted around easily in time. And this, it's inevitable that a landscape is going to have to get adjusted. Certainly been our experience. So they never stay static. So this particular landscape looked awesome after planting. We can see right after planting what it's gonna look like in the long term, because it was fully irrigated, good soil, good compost, all the right ingredients at the beginning, and then the perennials really explode. And you can see there's very little opportunity for weeds and evaporation, and so it's although it's sort of a diverse planting, it's quite easy to manage. Um, so that is kind of a planting plan, and that's a detail that's on top of. So our original agreement was just to produce this concept. And then if the client wants details, we'll price them. Now we know how many beds we have to fill up and the detail on the rain garden, or sorry, rainwater system, which I don't have here. So we generally take these in steps on acreage. On an urban site, we can price it all in one go because we have a better idea of, what that is going to entail. And then we often break these plantings out into sections. So this is kind of the front entry, and this is up a little further away, and a little driveway bed, and over here, and oh, sorry about that. I don't know why my mouse is doing that. This is how we're showing existing plants, and you can see they're labeled, and they are in a little database that we reference when we're putting our drawings together. So, ET04 is, I can't tell you what it is right now. I think that was a Douglas fir, but these all get identified. That's kind of part of our base plan. And with some projects, it can be really intensive. We've had some projects where, we have spent a lot of energy just documenting existing materials. And then we have a little detail here showing this permeable paving. Permeable paving for the patio, even though it's not really shown here, it's going to be flagstone and joints are going to be vegetated, and then this permeable parking area, which is what's called core. And we didn't get to this. We haven't installed this. They still want it done. I'm not sure I'm going to have time to do it, but again, we have little details here that we add. So a side view of how the patio looks and a detail on this parking area. And it has to be constructed a certain way or it just will not work, of course. I think I can show you one more here. I'm just okay, just 2 seconds here. I'm trying to find where I put it. Well, we can look at this. Here's a nice a small urban project. And we were just looking at the back garden. So in this case, we started with a sector map, and you can see project boundary is here, and we had some contour information that we gathered ourselves using a laser. We knew we needed some contour information. This was before we started using QGIS and LiDAR data, so we just shot this ourselves. And again, the sectors and the actions, and then we did a water plan, so figured out catchment off of the roof surface, and the plan was to put it into a rain garden to infiltrate it, and for that rain garden to benefit the plantings that were around it. Oh, sorry about that. And then, of course, we have some example images here to show our client what that's all about, and scale bar, and then some notes about it. And we ended up just capturing one panel here, this area A. We didn't do the second one because to get piping up to this corner was really, really difficult. We had to go under a retaining wall, and it was just not worth the time and energy. And here was our access layer. So again, we do access, water, and then access, and then soil. So access is all about the traffic patterns and the structure. Here we're doing a couple little patios and a retaining wall and stairs. And, not the best 3D rendering of that, but a little bit of an idea, and a little fence panel here to privatize this because it was going to be a rental. And then we pop in some images. So here it was going to be Allen block, an Allen block wall, and a concrete unit paver patio. And then the soil was just that. It was where would the soft landscape be? How would that interact with all the other elements? What it kind of might look like. This is another project we had done years ago. And let's see here. It's a different sheet showing the same thing with a couple of renderings. And then this one step that we do with people is we send them a planting palette. So we will show the area that's going to be planted up, and then we'll do a list of plants we think would work in the back in this garden, and then some images. And we don't necessarily use all of these, but this is just our palette, and this is what we would pull off of when we get into our final design here. And this really helps because, in my experience, you know, when I assemble or Angela assembles a planting plan, and someone would come back later and go, "Oh, I don't like, you know, X, Y, or Z," let's say, and you have to replace that. It can be a domino effect and be very difficult to replace just one or two plants unless they happen to be on the edge here. So any major structure within the landscape, if you had to swap it out, could, you know, you might have to redo the whole layout. So this, once approved, allows us to do whatever we feel is right with the planting. And then here we have kind of tree and shrub elements and then perennial elements. And it shows our client the sort of different weight, you know, how here there's a lot of structure with trees and shrubs. And then some details with the rain garden, pretty simple. They had a fence that got put in, and they wanted a fire pit, which didn't happen because it was just a little too much money. And then some details on the wall. Yeah, and that's about it. So let me complete that. I'm going to go back to, there we go. All right. So does anybody have any questions they would like to shoot out about what we've been looking at? You know, I could talk all day about different ways of laying out projects and etc. But that just gives you a little bit of an idea of graphically what we do, and everybody does something different, which is great. I'm sure for those who are going to keep designing for others after this course, you know, you'll find what you really like and it'll continually evolve, I'm sure. And a lot of that does depend on the software you're using. So maybe what we'll do is we'll just dive into these questions here. So let's look at Melissa's first, since she's on the call here. So you want some general tips and strategies relating to presenting the proposal, specifically from this course to a client. So Melissa, can you just clarify for me what you mean by proposal? Do you mean a design proposal or installation or the presentation of the drawing itself?
Well, I'm going to have to present this really to the clients.
I see.
I'm just using the word proposal.
Okay.
It's just anything that, you know, sells it, if you will, because there are some elements, you know, that I think are hurdles for my clients, and
Right.
just generally the strategies yeah.
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, I can run with that. Well, what you'll have noticed is when my wife and myself put together a design package, it might be anywhere between 5 and 10 design sheets, and you'll notice the template file is probably 150. So what we do is every time we design a layer, let's say we do our base plan, and we complete the water layer, we'll right then do a Zoom meeting with our clients and present what we've done. So we keep them involved each step of the way, and we accept feedback during those meetings, but often they're not ready to provide that until we get to the end. But the advantage of that is they see it during its creation, right? So they can tell when we get to the end, why are we here in this? Why does it look like this? Well, because we prioritize water and we're collecting it here and distributing it over here, whatever that reason is. So what I'd be careful, Melissa, is that if you are going to present present your design package, and it's pretty deep, right? There's a lot in there. You might want to consider doing it in pieces, or even split it up. Because I think what you might find is if you were to go through and present all of that package in one go, it might be a little too much for a client to absorb. And it may be a little too much for you to present too. We try and limit our presentations. Our goal is, for most of the projects, we try and hit an hour and a half. If I had 150 sheets to show, I mean, it would take a little while because there's a lot to include verbally that doesn't get put on the drawing itself. So one of my strategies for you, it would be try and break it up into manageable bits, whatever you think that is. And that may be, over the course of a few days or weeks, depending on what works for you and how you feel. You may feel, oh no, I can do this all in one go. Well, that's great. I would go for that, but realize that maybe it's just be a little bit too much for them. The structure. So yes, when we do that, we do water, access, soil. So for you, that's not too far from what we've done in this course, where we focus on water, we focus on some of those other elements, how you move through the site with zones, and the plantings themselves. So some designs are going to be heavier in one regard or another. I didn't show you all the examples I had for today, but one was really heavy on the hardscape end. It was, very heavy on stone walls and stairs and very little planting. So it really does depend. Do I create a narrative? No, I'm just be myself and try and explain the reasoning behind certain things. And it's really with all of our clients, no matter how knowledgeable they are with permaculture or regenerative design, it's an educational process too. You are providing them with a lot of information they're not aware of. For instance, with water, most people look at water as a liability, as opposed to it being an asset. And if it's not managed correctly, it can quickly become a liability. And that's the first little part of your question. Does that make sense for the first bullet there, Melissa? I want to make sure I address what you've asked here fully. Oh, I can't hear you, Melissa, so maybe you're not available, but
Sorry, I was typing.
unmute. Yeah.
I was typing it. Yeah,
Hmm.
access is one of the very main elements and goals. So if I
Okay.
stick to water access soil, that's, I think, a good template there. I wondered if, yeah, so leaving some things out because obviously some of the information was for the class purposes and getting to drilling down and how the strategies for drilling down to this information doesn't necessarily need to be reflected back to the clients, but.
Right. Well, that's a good point. And if you chunk those out, what we usually do is we'll set up a meeting, and often it's a Zoom meeting because it's just not practical for, um, you know, even though we work locally, you know, our project site might be an hour away. So if we're driving there and, you know, it takes up a huge amount of the day just to present a layer, it's much easier most of the time to just do a quick Zoom meeting. And what we'll often do is send out a PDF of that layer prior to the meeting, so they have a chance to look at it, and then we'll review it, and then wait for feedback if they have any, and they might not. So they may, with your clients, they may not have any feedback for you until you get to the end. But if you do break it out, I think you'll find that it's a more enjoyable process for you and them. But that's my opinion. I know everybody has a different approach. Some people will just present their concept, boop, all in one go and not even worry about specific layers. So I just like to have our clients really understand how things are put together, and just makes it a little bit easier for them to provide feedback. Um, So yeah, that is your first bullet here. Your second, how to determine priorities for phasing. Yes, every project is different. Yeah, that's a good question. I could every project, there's a couple of things that play into this. So every project is very different. People's priorities are different. So the other thing that you got to look at is or in my opinion, that you would want to look at is access. So on an urban site, for instance, one I didn't get to show you today, it had an extensive amount of demolition and hardscape work to do in the rear of the garden, and the access was okay, but it wasn't great. So there was no choice. That was phase one. We had to demo, do all that work, build all the patio and walls, and then the landscape, and then, basically button up the rear of the properties. And that was done in two phases. We did the hardscape first, and then we came in and did the soft landscape after. So it was like fall and then the next spring. And then we looked at the front, because if we had done the front first, we had to bring in so much equipment, we would have, demolished it and had to rebuild it. So it just made sense in that case. Sometimes, and that's kind of the macro. For us, what we generally do is we will do some preparation. So it usually means an excavator, a compact excavator, and some way of disposing of materials that are existing that you don't want. And then we start looking at some of the infrastructure that we have to put in. That might be irrigation infrastructure. That might just be, you have to build a wall first, but, we make sure there's drainage that's accommodated, and also that we can get infrastructure in behind the wall for irrigation. So we put sleeves in below the foundation of the wall. so those are all things that get phased in first. It's the prep, and that takes a lot of time. The actual planting is like, again, the icing on the cake. It hardly takes any time in comparison. It really is. We put a lot of effort into preparation and bed preparation. So often we'll excavate out subsoil and bring in topsoil. And then when you've excavated out for the soil, we'll drop in irrigation infrastructure before topsoil goes in, because it's so much easier since it's empty. And then you start to look at plants and mulch after that. So it really does depend. Where I live, our soils are quite poor, and often we want to get a really good start with good topsoil. So that is, excavation is part of it. If you have good soils to begin with, wow, that makes life a lot easier. It just makes it a little bit trickier to place your irrigation infrastructure in. You have to do a lot of hand digging or get a trencher or something. So phasing and timeline, they're often obvious because you need the bones in there before you get your plants going. And often, even on a urban project like the one I was describing, that's going to turn out to be a 4-phase project. And we've done 3. So the last phase is very small, but it's a area that got driven over during the whole, it had excavators, it had bin trucks coming and going, it had slinger trucks coming in with soil. So it's the last one to be done. And again, it's often obvious how you sequence it, but it does play into, again, access and what your client wants, and budget as well, and what's important. So hopefully, and by zone. So in part, it would be by zone. I'd say access plays a bigger role in that. On acreage projects, not so much, because on an acreage project, we would probably be looking at water collection first. And that's really not going to be by zone. That could cover a whole site. Like where we live, we collect off our roof and we pump that up to a higher point in our landscape. We got about 12,000 gallons of storage, a little bit more now. But that would be something we'd have to do initially before any plantings went in. So I hope that didn't confuse you too much, Melissa. But
No,
it is.
not at all. Thank you, Jamie, for everything. Adding your personal insights and experience. Right. As I had mentioned, a lot of things because of the end of the course and not being able to say confirm certain things with the clients, I've offered to go beyond the course and adjust things as we meet again and refine, and like you'd mentioned, refine and revise beyond the course specific to what they feel they can do. So I would propose a phased in plan, but it might change completely beyond the course specific to their needs. But anyway, so it's all in theory, especially with the gray water system, which there's only one place to put that, and it would interfere with the roots of the tree that they love. And so like I can just propose it, but it won't necessarily be feasible.
Right. Well, and for us, when we present a concept plan, honestly, the worst case scenario for me would be somebody looking at it and going, wow, that's perfect. Let's do it. And that happened to me once. They said it right then. Like I presented the drawing and okay, let's do it. And it's like, oh, no. The best landscapes are in my estimation get refined considerably after the concept. So Try and, it can be hard, but I really encourage client feedback, and we build that into all our pricing, and we're very clear with it, with our proposals that, you have 2 edits and, let's use them. And they do. But there's no edits when we get into details. So if I do a planting plan, that's it. You've approved the plant list that we're going to use, or the planting palette, and that's it. We do our thing, and there's no turning back with that. But the concept itself, we want to get it right. And then saying that, when we go to execute it and we're on site, we're looking at, okay, do we want to make this slightly different, a little different shape? It kind of goes from the macro and it gets distilled down, so that on site, all the changes are very, very minor, unless you notice something that you would never have seen during the design phase, like a groundwater issue, or you've run into, existing utilities that are underground, or there's something that prompts a big change. So that's not very common, but it can happen. So feedback is great, and being open to that is
I'm
great.
sorry, one more little question.
Sure.
Sorry, everybody. As far as the revisions, which you build 2 of them in, you said, you
Mhm.
build the cost of 2 of them in. Is that by you spend X number of hours on those revisions? How do you structure the time that you would spend on the revisions? Like you give them 8 hours, or you give them how?
Well, basically, when we do a design proposal, I look at it much the way I look at a project. So with a project, I break it out into phases and actually have to walk through in my head, how are we going to take the landscape from where it is to where we want it to be? So a lot of visualization on how it's going to happen. And that's what the foundation of the estimate or the quote is. So the same thing with the design. We break it out into how long it's going to take to document the site and to create the base plan, then to create those different layers on the knowledge that we have, and we have their questionnaire, so we kind of know what they want. And then we build in a couple of edits. And if there's details, we would include it there. So we just use a spreadsheet, and I don't have an example I can show you, but I track everything that we do. So if we, because we do a lot of designs, so if we quote one, we track the time we put into it to make sure that we're, pretty close. We don't need to be exact, but we are often pretty close. And there are occasions when we'll go over, and that's, you take note. Well, why is that? Would it be maybe the client took more time? And that has happened. We've had clients that really take a lot of time when we have these meetings. So yeah, I just I break it all out into different parts of the design process, and I even include the printing cost, right? So for us, we do 24 by 36 sheets, and a full package, it could be, $150 to print. So yeah, try and do it all. But you learn as you go, and eventually you've done it enough where it's a lot easier. You're focusing less on pricing and more on the design.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, I'm glad that helped you out, Melissa. Yeah, it's hard to at this part of the course to fill all those future needs that one might have on this, and that's hence, talking about this mentorship idea that's been tossed around with Javin and myself. And every time we get towards the end of a course, you can see for some people it would be a really good fit. So we'll let you know if we go forward with anything like that. And we've been talking about just having a free meeting to see if there's interest with people, and but no commitment right now as to when that might happen. So let's just go on to Brittany's question here. I know Brittany had a little interruption in the course, and she's working really hard to get all her assignments done. And she's probably not on the call right now, I don't think. But let's see what she has to look at here. So she was talking about hedgerows. So Brittany, one of the couple of really good resources to look at is OSU by chance has this great free download, this PDF you can download that Jude Hobbs and Pammy Manette put together on a guide to hedgerows, and wonderful. Jude Hobbs is a pretty brilliant designer and educator, and there's so much information here that's available. Another thing that I would like to point out is this course right here, and I'm sure a few of you getting bored at me referencing this website, the regenerativliving.online. So Jem Bernakovich, this is his little educational hub he's putting together, and I've taken a few courses right now, just finishing up this one. This last night is tonight on coppice agroforestry. I've taken the composting toilet course, fantastic. So I took this one that Jude Hobbs did on design and implementing multifunctional hedgerows. So now it's self-paced, so it's all the content that it was recorded. So a bargain for $150. And I would certainly encourage people to take a look at this. Neil Petrando, sorry, he did a low-tech erosion course here. I mean, there's just every year this just keeps getting more and more dense in terms of really good programs. So that, if you're interested in hedgerows, Jude Hobbs is the person you'd want to try and dial into. So that's only part of your question here. So you're looking for evergreen hedge. You don't want it to be conifers. You want plants that provide food and fodder for ruminants, medicine, food for humans. So yes, that's a pretty big question. I would, the best hedgerows I would think are going to be a combination of deciduous and evergreen, and they are going to be quite varied in height, as you can see here, and width. So they can be quite wide to be super effective. And I know that that Brittany's site is quite large, so you might be able to handle that. A couple of things that might jump out. Arbutus unido is a beautiful evergreen shrub that has an edible fruit that you could consider, and very closely related to the madrone or arbutus, which is our native tree that the northern boundary, very close to where I live, and it goes right down into California, I believe. Beautiful broad-leafed plant. So, but unido stays in that height range, whereas arbutus, I think it's Menzizi, it gets quite high. I had one fall over the other day with all the snow, which is unfortunate. So that is one evergreen that pops out. But I think to fill some of your needs here with fodder, it might be wise to look at deciduous, because what happens, and that's something that I picked up on this coppice agroforestry course, is that part of the need to coppice may be for fodder, and amongst other things. And that's a really valuable component if you have animals and you want to diversify their diet. There are so many plants that are going to fit into that category that it's very, very difficult to go through them today. It is going to be somewhat site specific, but there's so many variables in terms of the width of what you're working with. If you have ruminants or other grazing animals on the site, how are you protecting the hedgerow? How long is it? Yeah, a lot of variables. Are you going to be cutting the fodder and then supplying it, or are they going to be browsing when allowed? So a few things to consider there. Ceanothus is absolutely beautiful, and I can't see you ever going wrong with that. I know they're short-lived where I live. They get about near 20 years old and they'll go into decline. But they are such a great supporter of honeybees, as you've mentioned here. Even conifers, not a bad thing to add into a hedgerow. But again, if you're trying to avoid that because you have so much around you, there are some evergreens like Arbutus unido. But I think it's tricky designing these, and I would point you again to this guide and Jude's course here, which is um, very informative. She's a fantastic instructor. So I hope I have answered that. And we are getting now gone about 20 minutes over, which no big deal, but I'm gonna have to wrap up here. Does anybody have any questions before we close up today that given it's our last opportunity here? If so, please don't hesitate to unmute yourself, or you can type something in the chat, whatever you like.
Hey Jamie, it's James. Do you
Hi.
have more resources on building like pathway swales?
On pathway swales?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like a
Yeah, I remember your swale in your last assignment there. Um, Resources in terms of how to build them or some examples? What
yeah, how to build them. And examples are also nice.
right. Yeah, well, that'll be a little bit site specific. One good resource, I'll have to stop share here and go get another browser going for me to show you this. I'll just get it up on the screen. If you want to, very interesting, it'd be smaller scale than you had have on your drawing. Just going to go to Verge Permaculture here. Don't know if, let's go back. Here we are. So if you go on YouTube and you go to Verge Permaculture, and you'd have to go back, it might be in a playlist they have. Oh,
Okay.
sorry. Yeah, it might be in their playlist. I don't know. Probably not, but if you went back a few years in their videos, actually you can just type in swale. So there you go. If you type in swale, they go over large cold climate swales. They also go into these urban swales. So this is a good one that they did that I saw years ago. It's about 6 years old now, where they did what they called swale trails on their property.
Awesome.
And what they did was they would, let's say they had a 3-foot wide path. They excavated down, I think about a foot. So they took all that material out, and then they put in some drain pipe. I think they used Big O, right? So it's easy to handle.
Okay.
And then they backfilled it with wood chip
Oh,
so
okay.
that they could use it as a pathway, and it would also, I can't remember what they sent into the drain line. I think it was either off the roof or there was water coming, excess water coming from somewhere on their site. It may have come
Okay.
from a drain from a patio. I can't honestly remember. It was too long ago. But check that one out. That's really good. Um, if you're trying to move water along, you'll want to make sure you have a little bit of fall in the pipe.
Okay.
And just be mindful that in the winter, depending on your annual average rainfall, you might get behavior that's a lot different than, say, the growing season. So when we have done these, we make sure that if we're supplying water into the swale, we're able to use like a gate valve and turn it off during the winter months, because we don't necessarily want, the pathway to get flooded out.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe with your site, that's a little bit of a wet spot to begin with. Is that right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what you could do is almost make it like a conveyance swale, so it has a little bit of fall, and
Mm-hmm.
you're exiting somewhere. That's the trick. You want somewhere for that water to end up.
Okay.
Yeah, so that might be a roadside ditch, or it might just be a lower part of the property that's drier. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
I've got ideas.
okay,
Just we
but
don't have a lot of time.
cool. But using some form of piping isn't a bad idea because it does help the water move along
Okay.
in a more controlled manner. And I would, if it was me, I'd probably be using PVC piping, perforated pipe versus Big O. I um, don't really like Big O too much, but it's easy to put in. So yeah, so hopefully that helps you out, James.
Yep.
Right on.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And let's see here, Anna Karen. Thank you, Jamie. You're quite welcome. It's always a pleasure to do the Q&As and be part of this course. Um, so yeah, thank you very much for all of your participation, everyone. And I guess we will wrap up today's meeting. And really looking forward to seeing all of your final designs. So just to give you a heads up, the final design, it's a week from now, so it'll be 1 week today, it'll be due. And it takes me a little bit of time to go through all of them. But if you're running a little bit behind time, I typically would accept any designs up to the Friday. I can't figure out that date right now. Let's see, it'd be the 13th next Monday. So the Friday following the 13th. So it'd be the 17th. So Friday the 17th would be kind of the cutoff. And then the whole course is wrapped up by then. So if you are a little bit late, don't sweat it. I'll pick it up a little bit later in that week. And yeah. So thank you everybody for being part of the course. And again, really look forward to seeing your work. And thanks for all the great feedback. Yeah, drop me a note if you get stuck during your work at all, and we'll try and point you in the right direction. So have yourself a great week and best of luck with your assignment.